Hello and welcome to today's video where we're going to be showing you how to install the Motoklik TW 1.0 system on Kawasaki KX450 and 250 4-stroke models. My name is Jens Kopke and I'm the founder of Motoklik, and I would personally like to say thank you very much for purchasing your unit. We really hope that this gives you the information you need to ride with maximum confidence and attack the track as fast as you can. In today's video, we'll be taking you through how to fit the system. So we'll be starting with the rear suspension sensor and magnet holder that goes down by the swing arm here. Then we'll be moving to the front suspension measurement sensor wand, also the power supply cable, the central control unit that sits in front of the number plate here, and then also the handlebar controller, which you can use to start and stop recording your data. Before I continue on, I'd like to say a special thank you to Manoothworks here who are supporting us with making this video, and also to CCM Racing in Dublin for the lend of this beautiful Kawasaki KX450 today. So without further waiting, let's get started and show you what's inside the Motoklik box and what tools you need to get going. The Motoklik TW 1.0 system contains the instruction book for fitting the system, long cable ties for the handlebar controller, a medium length and shorter cable ties for fitting the sensors and managing the cabling, the front suspension sensor, the front magnet holder, the front sensor collar, the handlebar controller, rear suspension sensor, the central control unit, the rear magnet holder, the power supply cable, Velcro pads for securing the central control unit, and an optional high-speed adjuster. Tools needed are a 1/4-inch drive T-bar, extension and 8mm socket, as well as a Phillips and flathead screwdriver. You'll also need a 3/8-inch ratchet, extension, and a size 10mm 3/8-inch socket, and a size 6 hex drive. You'll also need a 1/2-inch drive 21mm socket and ratchet, as well as a torque ratchet with a minimum of 12 Nm setting and a snips. You should now know what tools you're going to need to install the full Motoklik system, and in the next part of this video we're going to show you how to fit the rear suspension sensor and the rear magnet holder. The rear suspension sensor will sit in behind the brake master cylinder here, and we'll run the cable up along the inside of the frame by the right hand side radiator and feed it through the triple clamps here at the front. The rear magnet holder will be very easy to install also. All we have to do is unscrew this brake line guide here and screw in the Motoklik brake line guide. Let's get started. Start by removing the standard brake line guide using the 2 Phillips screws. You can then reuse these screws to position the Motoklik rear magnet holder on the swing arm in the same position. This can be a little bit tricky, so be sure to take your time and make sure not to cross-thread any of the screws into the soft aluminium. When the rear magnet holder is in position, we can then move on to fitting the rear sensor, which fits in behind the rear brake master cylinder. The contours of the master cylinder fit exactly into the contours of the rear sensor, so you'll feel that a kind of snap fit as it goes into position. We can then use 2 of the medium length cable ties to secure the rear sensor to the master cylinder. Pull the cable ties tight so that the sensor can't move once it's in position. Trim off any excess using the snips. With the rear sensor in position, we can continue with routing the rear sensor cable. The rear sensor cable will be brought up the inside spar of the frame, but take great care to make sure that the cable doesn't touch off the exhaust, as when the exhaust is hot it will melt through the cable. You can use 2 of the medium length cable ties to secure the cable in position behind the spar of the frame. Pull the cable tight to make sure that there isn't any slack left, which could cause the cable to vibrate against the exhaust during use. Continue to route the cable up behind the engine mount and up along towards the right side radiator. Snip off any excess material. Continue to remove the front number plate. With the front number plate removed, we can now guide the rear sensor cable up behind the frame guard, in behind the radiator and out between the triple clamp and the fork. At this point you should have the rear suspension position measurement sensor fitted to the back of the brake master cylinder, as well as the rear magnet holder which has been used to replace the standard brake line guide. The cable from the suspension sensor is routed then up along the inside of the frame, making special care that the cable isn't in contact with the exhaust, and then it leads up here where it's clipped in along with the throttle cables, and the cable can hang out the front then just in front of the triple clamps. In the next section of the video we're going to go through attaching the power supply cable as well as the front suspension sensor measurement wand. But before we move to that, I think we deserve a jelly for all that work. What about you? To fit the power supply cable is relatively easy. There's a small clear coloured 4-pin connector in behind the shroud here that I will show you in a closer angle where the power supply cable can plug into. And in order to fit the front suspension sensor wand, we're actually going to have to remove the left side fork from the bike completely. So in order to do that, we'll have to remove the front wheel and the front brake caliper as well as the brake line. Loosen these bolts here in the triple clamps and slide the fork out, and I'll be bringing you through the procedure on how to do that, as well as how to reassemble everything properly to make sure that your forks are aligned so that they won't bind up as they move through the stroke. And also you want to make special care that the brake caliper has been reinstalled properly also, so that you have your front brake working when you go out on track. So the first step we're going to do next is to fit the power supply cable. The power supply cable will plug directly into the 4-pin OBD connector which is located behind the shroud on the bike. You can see here that there's a small tab that needs to be pressed in on the power supply cable connector so that it can be removed from the frame of the bike. Using the flathead screwdriver, pry the OBD connector away from the frame, and also remove the top cover which is also attached to the frame. Keep the original OBD cover cap somewhere safe so that you don't lose it. You can now plug in the Motoklik power supply cable into this OBD cable. Then slide the Motoklik power supply cable connector onto the tab that's located on the frame. This can be a little bit tricky and you may need to pry the tab back slightly so that you can slide it on easily. You can now plug in the OBD cable into the Motoklik power supply connector which has been mounted onto the tab on the frame. Route the power supply cable out between the triple clamps and fork. We will now continue the procedure to fit the front sensor collar. To do this, we will need to remove the front wheel and fork. Begin by removing the 2 bolts that hold the brake master cylinder in place, as well as the 2 bolts that hold the brake line in place on the fork guard. Once these are removed, you can continue to loosen the 2 bolts holding the left side axle lug in place and loosening the main axle nut. With the main axle nut loose, you can then undo the two bolts on the right side fork lug, remove the nut completely and slide out the front axle to remove the wheel. Remove the remaining threaded in bolts from the front brake caliper and leave it hanging out to the side of the bike. You can then loosen the bolts on the top and bottom triple clamp to slowly and carefully slide out the fork leg. With the fork leg removed, you can drop the front sensor collar over the top of the fork and slide it down into position over the pre-existing wear band. The original wear band is a type of circlip, and there's a groove in the sensor collar where the circlip clicks into exactly, so that you know that you have the front sensor collar in the correct position. The cutout for the front sensor should be located at approximately 90 degrees to the direction of the clicker cap on the top of the fork leg. With the front sensor collar in place, you can now carefully slide the fork back into position. When reinstalling the fork leg, it's absolutely critical to make sure that you have the height of the cap at the correct height above the top triple clamp. This should be the same on both sides of the triple clamp, where the right fork leg and the left fork leg are at the same height. Once you have the forks in the correct position, you can now proceed to tighten each of the triple clamp bolts. Make sure to use the torque wrench for this procedure and set the torque to the correct specification as per the owner's manual. By using the correct torque, you will ensure that the piston doesn't get bound up inside the suspension as it travels through the stroke. We will now reattach the front wheel, and be sure to follow these steps bit by bit to make sure that the forks are properly aligned on the axle that holds the front wheel in place. If you tighten everything together too much, or that the forks are also splayed out, they can bind up as the forks move up and down the stroke, giving you a subpar suspension performance. We can now reassemble the front wheel. Begin by lifting the wheel into position and slide the axle through from the right fork lug into the left fork lug. Take your time doing this procedure, and the axle should slide through without the use of a hammer. Once you have the axle in place, gently tighten on the nut and reposition the brake caliper onto the brake disc. Gently thread the bolts into position and make sure that the meat of the brake pads are in contact with the brake disc on both sides. Once you have the caliper in place, tighten up the bolts to the correct torque specification as per the owner's manual. Continue to tighten the main axle nut and the left side fork lug pinch bolts. We will now attach the front magnet holder. The front magnet holder is used as a replacement for the OEM brake line clamp. Slide the front magnet holder into position over the fork guard and position the brake line in between, using the rear plate to sandwich the brake line in position. Now, using the two original bolts, we can tighten the brake line clamp together, which will also hold the front magnet holder in position. The next step used here will be used to ensure that the forks are parallel and that they won't bind up against each other as they travel up and down through the stroke. With the front wheel installed and the brake caliper back in position, make sure that the right side fork lug bolts are loose, and then spin the front wheel as fast as you can while grabbing the front brake and bringing the front wheel to a sudden stop. The sudden jolt will help to align the fork lug correctly on the right hand side, which floats on the axle at this point. Once you've done this a few times, the forks will be parallel and you can continue with tightening the bolts on the right side fork lug. Make sure that all bolts around the front wheel which you've removed are now tight and are back in position correctly. The alignment of the front magnet holder to the front sensor is critically important to make sure that you get the correct position measurement. The magnet should not be directly over the front sensor wand, but should be slightly in front of it. You can check this by making sure that the center of the magnet is aligned with the alignment line on the collar, and at the same time that the slight piece of plastic protruding from the magnet holder on the inside is centered over the center of the front sensor. Using the medium length cable ties, you can then secure the front sensor wand in position. Again, make sure that the slight piece of plastic protruding from the front magnet holder on the inside is directly above the center line of the front sensor wand. Also make sure that the front sensor wand is parallel with the fork so that the magnet remains in the same position throughout the stroke. Use one further cable tie to keep the sensor cable in position. Well done! At this point now we should have the front sensor wand installed on the left side fork leg along with the alignment collar and front magnet holder, which replaces the standard brake line clamp on the fork guard. And I hope you followed that procedure correctly also for reinstalling the front wheel to make sure that the forks don't bind. The great news is that that is definitely all of the hard work done, and we're on to a relatively straightforward stretch home to get the Motoklik system fully installed on this bike. The next steps we're going to go through are how to install the handlebar controller that goes up here, and then finally the main control unit which goes on the inside of the front number plate. Put all the connectors in and then reinstall the front number plate, and that's it, we're done. So a nice short little run to the finish, but I think before that we'll just have one more jelly. What do you think? Yeah, I think so too. To secure the handlebar controller in position, we will use the two long cable ties supplied with the Motoklik kit. Each of the cable ties can be slidden into the slots on either side of the handlebar controller before placing the unit on the bar pad and wrapping the cable ties around so that it also includes one of the handlebar mounts in between the cable ties to keep the handlebar controller in the correct position. With the handlebar controller secured in place, you can then lead the cable from the handlebar controller underneath the bar pad and out in front of the triple clamps, where it will be put with the other cable from the front rear suspension sensors and the power supply cable. We can now connect all 4 cables to the central control unit, the power supply cable going into the lightning bolt, the handlebar controller going into the circle, the front suspension sensor going into the triangle, and the rear suspension sensor going into the square. You can then use one of the small cable ties to bundle the cables together and keep them tidy behind the front number plate. Finish out the installation by applying one of the Velcro pads to the back of the central control unit and one of the Velcro pads to the back of the front number plate. Make sure that the central control unit will fit nicely behind the number plate when it's in position, and that the cables don't get caught up in the handlebars or triple clamps when turning left and right. Reattach the front number plate using the bolt and make sure that the brake line is in fact in front of the number plate, not behind. And that is it. Your Motoklik TW 1.0 system should now be fully installed on your Kawasaki KX 450 or 250 4-stroke machine. And I really hope you found it easy enough to do all the way along. We tried our best in the design process to make this simple and easy so that you don't need to modify your bike in any way, and that you don't have to be a fully qualified mechanic or technician to install the system either. At this point, you should have your rear suspension measurement sensor mounted on the inside of the rear brake master cylinder. You should have replaced the standard brake line guide with the Motoklik brake line guide that has the magnet built into it on the back. Your front suspension sensor one should be fitted to the left side fork leg, and make sure that the alignment is right, that it's parallel with the movement of the fork, and also that the alignment collar is in position down by the wear band where the fork guard is, that the front magnet holder is also on the fork guard, that you have your handlebar controller up here on the bar pad, and the main Motoklik central control unit is located in behind the front number plate here. Do a couple of safety checks as well before you take the bike out riding, so just make sure that your rear brake is working here, make sure that your front brake is working, and also make sure that your throttle is snapping shut from side to side and that there's no cables getting caught up or anything like that. If you have any feedback for us, then please feel free to write them in the comments down below, or you can also contact us through the contact submission form on the website www.motoklik.com, motoklik.com. We'd also really appreciate it if you could give us a like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, or share our Facebook page, or follow our Instagram page. We're trying to build an online community as best we can so we can keep in touch with you guys and keep you up to speed on what we're doing. And final also thank you to CCM Racing again and Motoklik here for the beautiful video studio to make this video possible. But for now, I think a massive well done to you once again. Well done for fitting the system, and I think we deserve to finish off the rest of these jellies, don't you? I hope you enjoyed them, and we'll catch you in the next video soon.